DevRel Deep Dives. Yar!
All of our guests are here. Hi, guys. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Hello. All good.
Good. Well, look, I couldn't have wished for a better set of panelists for this topic. Matt and I just kind of teed it up. But again, so I'm Robin from Peritus, but we have a great crew here with different perspectives to bring to the table. So I thought we'd do a quick introduction, and then I'll tee up the topic and we'll take it from there. So let me suggest I'll go around the wheel a little bit. So we'll go in my wheel.
What does your wheel look like?
Okay, and I'll kind of close it off and tee up the topic. Vanity, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, perfect. Hey everyone, very nice to be here. My name's Namdi Regbalem. I'm a partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners, where I focus on investing in technical tools for technical people, which ends up meaning developer tools, application infrastructure, and data science, machine learning. I've personally been a self-taught programmer ever since I was a kid, so I really love this stuff. And a big part of my effort in working with founders is figuring out DevRel and encouraging them to think about this topic, as early as possible in their journeys as founders. So excited to be here.
Cool. Okay, Carolyn.
Good morning from Vancouver. Carolyn Luco. I've got a company called Revere Communications, and we're an agency for developer relations. But I've been doing DevRel since I founded my first developer community back in 2001 for wireless. And since then have supported startups, supported big companies, have come in as a fractional DevRel leader in organizations. And how many 20 some odd years later, I'm still thinking DevRel is just super exciting. And of course, I have to plug our book. We wrote a book on developer relations, and all of the things that we had learned over the last 20 some odd years. I thought, what am I going to do with this? I just want to open source it and make all these frameworks available to everyone so we can elevate, like everybody's been saying, let's elevate what's happening in DevRel.
Yeah, I'll give you a plug.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome read. It helped me get calibrated on what's going on in this sector really quickly. PJ.
Hey, so greetings from Buffalo, New York. My name is PJ Haggerty. I'm the founder of DevRel.io, which is a developer and community relations as a service company. We started focused on small organizations who couldn't do DevRel or couldn't meet the needs of their community by themselves. So we started off in that vein, and since then we've grown, and we work with companies that are small and looking to reach out to communities, to companies that are huge and just don't know how. So that's what we focus on. I've been doing DevRel for about 13 years. Before that, I was a developer focusing in open source technologies. I'm a big fan of that. And I like to say that I've applied that to the way that we actually do our community work. Beyond that, I'm one of the hosts of the Community Pulse podcast. So I'm pretty excited to be here and be part of the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. So I'll give you the 15 seconds on me. Just so I grew up and built and scaled many businesses across the enterprise software sector. So I'm kind of new to the DevRel sector. That's why I really appreciate great books by Carolyn and all the podcast interviews that we've done over the last 7 or 8 months. So we're super excited about the trend. We think there's a particularly valuable role that we hope to play as this market continues to evolve. But I kind of bring an operator's perspective to it, right? Having run a lot and scaled a lot of software businesses, no doubt this is the way of the future. But I think that it's really important that the community efforts can be linked to really material conversations that happen at the C-suite. This is where the world is going. So I think everybody in the DevRel industry has a tremendous career ahead if they can figure out how to do that, communicate their value, align with the other stakeholders, show them how they can help the community, but also benefit from it at the same time. So that's why I wanted to have this kind of free-flowing conversation with all you guys. I know you think about this topic a lot.
Every waking hour.
Yeah. We can start with you, Carol. I know you advise a lot of people at kind of that senior executive level. So how do you get them to think about the business impact of community?
I guess it depends on the size. So we certainly work with larger companies, and often it's those executives that are trying to convince their leadership on DevRel. And what we always want them to take a look at and consider is what are the priorities of your own company? What's the ROI that everybody else is looking for? And let's figure out how we tie developer relations into that. And if you don't have that tie-in, if you can't prove why, $1 spent on your developer program is better, is the best way to spend money as opposed to $1 spent on somebody else's program within your company, they're going to move the money over somewhere else. So you really need to be able to have those tie-ins. I think those are super, super important.
Yeah, just to jump in, I can't help but agree, Carolyn. I think that what a lot of people miss, especially when they're initially looking at DevRel, is determining what the metric of success looks like. They often tie it into something that makes sense in other worlds. Like, a CFO will look and say, okay, well, how much literal ROI do we get if we, spend on an event, or we specifically run a specific program? How many people are top of funnel? How many people are mid funnel? And DevRel doesn't always work quite that way. I know that, there's been so many jokes about like, oh, we measure our progress in hugs and high fives. And that, yeah, that's true. We are a relational based system, but at the same time, we have to figure out how those relations work in the metrics of success that our organizations want to be a part of. But step one is, what do we consider success? How do we figure that out? And once I think someone at the C-suite level can determine that, then they can determine exactly what they want to do to leverage their DevRel team.
Yeah, Peter, I just asked you to follow up on how do you encourage people to look beyond a vanity metric? Because there's so much data you can measure and declare victory. Marketeers, I've been one a lot of my career, so it's easy to kind of dress up marquee metrics and celebrate. That's all good, but there's a difference between what is a vanity metric and what is truly business impact. Yeah.
Right. I mean, for me, I've always asked my clients and the people that I work with, well, what does this metric mean to you? If you come to me and say, hey, we want you to write 8 blog posts, and we want each of those blog posts to have 2,000 reads. Okay, well, what does 2,000 reads mean? What do you think that's going to get you? What is this leading to as far as your value of success? I mean, I could easily go out and find 2,000 people to read a blog article.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're interested in the things you had to say, even if they finish the article. I mean, then we can get into how metrics are measured and all that. But if you're not willing to ask yourself why that's a metric, then I'm willing to step in and say, hey, why is that your metric? Determine why this is your level of success, because a lot of times it is based on older ideas of marketing or sales that lead people to say this is what I think is success. And with DevRel, that's not the case.
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that one.
Okay.
So I think there's 2 ways to think about it. I mean, developer relations, depending on the company, if it's a developer first company, for instance, your whole company is about developer relations. So any marketing that you do and anything that you're measuring has to be driving towards the bottom line, because that's what you do. And so do you want to make sure that who's ever reading the blog is that going to make them, I guess the things to measure, is it going to help them build something faster, or is it convince them to sign up and use your API or tool or whatever it's going to be? So I mean, those are definitely measurements that you can use and put into that. If you're more of a developer plus company and your tool or your product, your developer product, is something that's enhancing something that you're something that's already existing, then the measurement might be a little bit different. But I think you always have to look at that high level measurement. And so, is it actually going to create more awareness for your existing product? Great, you can measure that, or is it actually going to decrease support costs? You should be able to measure that as well, right? Those are still, very much ROI driven metrics that are important to think about. So it's not just about those blog posts. Where do those lead up? Where do those roll up, and where do they roll across the developer journey?
Absolutely. I should have been clearer about that. You're absolutely right.
Well, we'll let Andy get in, and then, but Carolyn, I think we'll circle back later on you've teed up this kind of developer journey. I think is a framework for thinking about how you can create value at different steps of that developer journey. So we'll come back to that and think about that. But Andy, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, vanity metrics are such a funny topic for me. I have a very simple sort of heuristic for whether something is a vanity metric or not. And the question is like, does this metric make us feel good about ourselves, or does it actually drive value for end users? If it just makes you feel good about yourself and you can't drive value for end users, it's very likely a vanity metric. And like the perfect example that I love to bring up is, I work with a lot of early stage companies that are either pre-launch or soon after launch, and oftentimes it's become very kind of in vogue to build these like wait lists of users and people who have signed up, and you feel really good about it, and you put it in your pitch deck like, look all these people who signed up for our wait list. I think that's a total vanity metric. This does not prove that you've driven value for anyone other than yourself.
You don't invest in companies with long wait lists.
It's not a negative signal. It's just not necessarily a positive one. And so I always kind of bring it back to like what's actually driving value for end users, and then presumably that will eventually drive value for you as a business, assuming you can kind of extract value from there. But yeah, that's kind of a nice heuristic that I tend to use.
Yeah. Well, there's a question that came in on the channel here. I'm just going to read it out so we get some audience participation going. It's from Nitin Parmar. I hope I said his name correctly. It says, do you have some concrete examples of successful KPIs being used in firms you've worked in or with?
Yes.
Go ahead.
One of the companies we were recently working with too, I think one of the challenges with DevRel and DevRel products has often been, how do you measure what's happening within a product? And they were using something called Mixpanel to be able to go, yes, we can see when somebody's actually starting with the product and what they've built and when they finished with it. And so, there you want to find, the time to hello world, right? How long does it actually take them from the time they've started your API until they can look at their dashboard and go, yes, this is finished, or they've made that call. So, those are some important metrics to look at. Active monthly users, depending on the product, can be good, or it could be a vanity metric too. You need to be able to think about, somebody might just need your product once, and that's okay. But as long as they can use it as quickly as they can and be able to get the support that they need, then that becomes really important. I'll let you guys fill in some other blanks.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things to understand too is the difference between KPIs and OKRs. Our philosophy has always been like, OKR is the goal, that's your metric. KPI is the tactic you use to get there.
Right.
So I think one I was working with a company that open source. They were focused on contributors. So like our metric was, can we get 10,000 contributors over the course of the next month? And our KPIs were like, can we start an LMS that actually makes it easier for contributors to onboard? Can we, write some case studies of what it's like to be a first-time contributor? Can we, mark 200 tickets that specifically say low-hanging fruit, so it's for a beginner? That will increase our contributor count. So, I mean, your KPIs are really like the tactics you're using. And with us, the tactics are what made it easy. What was the bridge we're building for contributors? What gates are we knocking down for contributors? And the OKR was the actual metric, which we did hit. We exceeded. We actually doubled it. But like the whole point is the OKR, that's the metric you're trying to hit. Yeah. KPIs are just the things you're trying to do. They're more like checklist items. So
I think the KPIs will change over time, right? So what you meant leads up to the goal will have to change because you're instrumenting different things.
Yeah, and KPIs need to be fluid because, I mean, in that example, like, great. So we got 20,000 new contributors. Wonderful. Now, those are new contributors. What are we doing next quarter, however you're measuring these things, to actually grow that and say, we've got all these new contributors. Well, they need to like move along their journey somehow. Now we need a whole new set of KPIs just for them.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah. There's any number of different metrics out there. I work with a lot of, data and application infrastructure companies, and, that oftentimes are kind of spinning up things in the cloud or on kind of virtual machines. And one really important metric is just sort of number of folks actually running in production. It's like there's that book, Crossing the Chasm, of like going from product development to marketing. There's sort of another chasm of going from just trying out the thing to actually using it in production. And I really love that one because it actually suggests that you're driving real business value for someone, that they're willing to go through the pain of sort of making sure that the product is hardened and working and, you know, bug free and capable of running in production in a long-lived setting. And so that's a big one that my companies often use.
That's a good point too, because we sure see, I mean, this isn't supposed to be a talk just on metrics, but we sure see a lot of companies talking about how many members are in their community. And, you know, what does that mean? Is that, you know, then I think that really becomes vanity metrics. Is that how many people have signed up for your newsletter, your information source, your, you know, whatever it is, but knowing how many people are actually using the product and, you know, using it to actually make something of value is, if you can measure that, that's what's really important.
Yeah, I always think about it as an operator, right? When I always coach my teams, if activation is kind of pay to play, so get people activated, then you have to look at the engagement, right? However you measure it, it'll be different on the different business. But if people aren't coming back and using it more and more often, then you have a problem. You need to really understand it. And ultimately, then it becomes: are they expanding? Are they getting more of their company to use it, or are they using it more intensively? So that now you're on a path to monetization, right? So that's generally what I look for in my own business, and that as I talk to my peers. So hey, that's a good segue to a sales question. So so there is somebody who's asked a sales question in the channel. Let me read this correctly, and. The idea is one Syrian, so I have to look up his name. I'll say his name at the end. I tend to look at our sales orgs as the one-to-one to bottom line sales. I look at DevRel as seed planters who crops grow over time to become leads for the sales orgs. Is that the appropriate mindset? And if true, a vanity seed today can become a warm lead tomorrow. So how to seed into active growing healthy plants that that can be harvested for whatever you want to do with them.
Well, Robin, that is very close to the metaphor you and I talked about the other day.
Exactly.
So from Nandi and Carol. So I used to work at a company called Engine Yard, and we really enjoyed train metaphors. Yeah. We talked about how our DevRel team, our job was to build the train tracks, and marketing was to build the engine, and then sales job was to drive it home. So it is kind of that idea, but I don't want to get into the idea that DevRel is pre-sales. That's a big mistake that a lot of people get. Marketing is pre-sales. Developer marketing is pre-sales. DevRel is like pre that. So let's not even put sales in the same place. But you're not wrong. It's possible that a seed that is planted by DevRel ends up being a warm lead or a full-on, ambassador level lead in a couple weeks, in a couple months, depending on your cycle there. I've had folks, in various organizations I've worked for, who in no way would think about using the product we were working with, and simply showing up in their community kind of, made a connection, and that suddenly grew into a lead, and we saw huge growth there. So that's not a non-apt metaphor, I think. A little farmy for my taste, but not
a little farmy. I've got two comments on that. I think sales gets a really bad rap. If you're in a company, you're in sales. Yeah. If you're going out talking to one of your developers, you're selling. Unless even if you're in a nonprofit, there's some reason why you're in business, right? So you're always in sales, whether it's pre-sales or post-sales or whatever it is. You're in sales. The second one I would say is there's such a movement towards self-service that oftentimes, unless you're, a very, very large company, you're actually not going to see sales at all. You're just going to, so in that regards, is developer relations pre-sales? Yeah, for sure. Because, the advocates are out there, and whatever else you're doing online is explaining to them why your product is so fabulous. And then you've got a great developer experience for them, and they do it. They might not see a technical salesperson at all.
Yeah, what I would add, and this is sort of like irrespective of whether one wants to call it sort of pre-sales or pre-sales, is that if you are going to connect it with sales, you need to take that seriously. And what I mean by that is like going back to the notion of sort of vanity metrics and like the wait list example. It's not a useless metric, but you need to know how it eventually converts into something that you do actually care about. So like if you don't know that the rates at which people off our wait list convert into users, convert into whatever, then it is truly a vanity metric. But if you know that at some rate, people who've come off our wait list convert into users of our product, convert into leads, etc., then you actually have something that does eventually tie to some metric of either customer or business value. And so it's sort of like, if you want to use DevRel as sort of the seeds for eventual sort of lead gen, totally fine. Just know kind of at what rates that tends to convert, so that you can actually kind of take the metrics seriously.
Yeah, the way I think of it is the more things change, the more things they stay the same, right? So businesses are businesses. So the goal of businesses, marketing is always going to try to expand and nurture the funnel. That's kind of what they do. Now the how has changed, right? Same thing with sales. Sales, their job is to acquire paying customers, right? And that's not going to change, but you don't want them piling on the community, chasing people away because it starts to feel too salesy. So understanding how and when they should be, connecting with the customer so that the human salesperson adds value to the process is important. I think the third is churn risk, right? So SaaS businesses are SaaS businesses, although the metrics are changing. Churn is a death to any SaaS business. So understanding who's churning off and where and why are they churning off, and how is that impacting your forward renewal stream? That's the other third business metric that, again, I think the how and maybe how we measure might even change, but those seem to be the fundamentals of any growth subscription business. Yeah.
That brings up a good point, though, about what you were all talking about is that corporate alignment. And, for developer relations, because we haven't had as much respect over the years, we've often worked in these silos, but really it's and hoping that somebody's going to notice us, come and say hi, and we're going to tell you how fabulous we are. But it's as indicative on us in DevRel to go and meet other people within the company and go to sales and go, please let me understand what you're doing so we can support you and we can compliment you, as opposed to just sitting back going, that's not us. We're not in sales.
Right. No, I agree with you 100%. I think that what a lot of DevRel organizations miss is actually that internal opportunity. They're so focused on that external flow and that external interaction. And what they actually miss is you need to be nurturing the same thing internally. You should know everyone in your sales org. You should know, maybe not everyone, but as well as you can at scale. You should know everyone in the marketing org. You should plan things and deal with these things together, because when you are dealing with events or you're developing content, whatever it is you're doing in DevRel is connected to everyone internally, and everyone needs to know. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. If you are, kind of a wallflower, first of all, this job is not for you. Second of all, though, it's really not going to work out for you internally if you're just outwardly facing extroverted and inwardly facing introverted. That is not a recipe for success. And also, we've talked about metrics. How do you establish what your metrics are if you don't know what everyone else wants you to do, or how you can help them be successful?
Right. And Nandi, I know you're really passionate about content, right? So how do you think about the role of different kinds of content that's going to create impact across these different business disciplines that all have a stake in the community?
Yeah, it's a good question. The first point I always make when I get sort of asked about DevRel content is always get it out the door and then figure out how to optimize it later. In other words, I think most orgs that I've worked with, especially small startups, have enough difficulty just getting content out on a regular basis that trying to figure out exactly what it should be and what not to do, I think is the second order thing. So first, focus on getting content out on a regular basis. And then, as you become a sort of more formal organization and you start having these functions build up within your team, that's when what some of our discussion we were just having around making sure that you're understanding what the other needs of the other folks in your organization are, making sure you have good rapport with them, making sure you understand how they see the business and what efforts they're working on. That's when you can start to tie content into some of the other things going on in your company. And so it can be anything from I think it's Planet Scale that has these release weeks where for the entire week they're sort of talking about the new products that are coming out, and it's a coordination across the entire organization. I think it's a perfect example of coordinating content. across your internal organization. There's almost like a, David Sachs at Craft Ventures talks about like the cadence of like, in some cycle we have a release, and around that release or around this conference or whatever, everyone in the company is oriented towards whatever content, whatever outreach needs to happen. I think getting into that kind of cycle is great. And it's something that like all folks in the team can kind of align in.
Yeah, there's actually it's more of a comment than a question that just came in around DevRel and support, something, Carolyn, you referred to earlier on. So let me just read it out and we can riff off of that. Any business that has a set of APIs and invests in developer support and developer support team, so not DevRel, but developer support team within their tech support is doing DevRel. They might not be doing it well if they only focused on post-sale support. They just might not be doing well. So I think it does bring up the topic of, the tech support people have a huge stake in the community. And probably also, what I've seen is that they probably are one of the best sources of high value content, right? Because they get to see all the stuff that turns into cases and all the stuff they don't want to turn into cases, maybe even more importantly. So when I talk to support execs, what they say, there's so much that we know internally that we think should be public knowledge. Now, how do we prioritize and publish that in a safe way, but also increasingly automated way? So that's one problem I hear about that they're struggling with. They know they do that there's direct benefit to case deflection and happier customers, right? But there's just so much of it that they have to sift through and figure out how to publish. A lot of it is not very structured with all the growth of internal Slack channels and the like. And then the second problem I hear from support people is that as we grow, as we get out of kind of Pied Piper status for our business, and now the business is going like crazy, like everybody gets super busy on building product because they're reacting to next feature request, et cetera. So the founders and the top engineers and top tech support people just don't have the time to respond anymore. So how do you scale the responsiveness as your business starts to thrive? And then how do you untrap all that internal stuff that so you can, for the benefit of the community? So that's a different set of problems that I've heard a lot.
That is, I think every company we've been involved with over the last 20 some odd years have had that problem where, you'll get feedback from developers going, this isn't working, and you try and feed it back to product and they're going, well, we don't have time to deal with that right now because we got to get this next version out, but you can't get the next version out if this isn't working. And when we were writing the book and really thinking about it, we purposely said, let's talk about support in a positive way. Let's talk about it as developer success.
Yeah.
And I think if we can think about it that way, because often that support and then that feedback loop just gets so mixed because you're either wanting to get developers in the door or products out the door. And then all of a sudden it's like, and then often the measurements like that, how many are coming in and what's the product going out? And until we really start to think about developer success and about making sure they're creating a product with your product. And they can't be successful if your product is not working, or if there's not an update that they're looking for, you're not giving them information in time, or whatever it is. And so I really think we've got to change that mindset internally about it being developer success as opposed to, oh, it's just support.
Yeah. If support is chasing cases, then we'll never get out of our gerbil wheel. And I don't think you're ever going to scale, right? So it's almost like the early days of customer success. It used to be customer success was about how do you have a great initial positive experience with your product and you're getting value. That's what we used to measure. Then it became more of a renewals game, and it's kind of changed the definition of what people think about. But I think going back to those roots of, hey, people got to love your product and see value of it. Otherwise, they're going to go somewhere else, even more so in this developer first world.
Well, and I keep saying, you got to remember that your product is an input into another product. Right? They depend on your product for their product.
Yeah,
exactly.
And have choice. Lots of choices.
Yeah, you can't just wipe your hands of it like you can. And oh well, somebody went out and bought my French fries or my hammer. It's like I don't have to worry about it anymore. Like you have to worry about it because you're an input into something somebody else is building.
Well, maybe we'll flip the switch a little bit, say, okay, if you guys were talking to a CEO who who wants to embrace this kind of community approach to growth and is unsure how to think about how to invest, like what would you tell her or him?
I think my first biggest piece of advice would be, don't worry about building your own community. Find the community you should already belong to and become a good citizen there first. Like I said, we work with a lot of open source folks, and it's a lot easier in open source because first of all, you're part of the open source community, and then you're maybe a member of the Python community, and then you're a member of the DevSecOps community within Python. So there's already communities out there. I think one of the big mistakes a lot of organizations make is they go out and say, oh, we're going to be the company XYZ community. And it's like, that's great. No one exists for that yet. You have no users. You have no developers. You don't have that yet. Go participate in the community. Be a good community citizen first.
Yeah, right. It's great brand building.
It is.
I would say number one, align your internal teams. Mm-hmm. Tell them why we're going to do it. Build a good journey. Because if you can go out and talk to everybody that you want, but if all of a sudden developers come and they can't figure out what you're doing and and the experience is very difficult, you're not going to be able to do anything with that. And then go and nurture that community and start with the willing.
Yeah, I feel like you guys already took all the good stuff. So now I don't know what to say. I think you basically covered it. I actually appreciated PJ what you said around going to where people kind of already are. It's like a big failure mode to say like, we're going to plant the flag on this totally irrespective of what already exists, and like we're just going to do it, and it just invariably ends up not working super well. I think like going to those communities that already exist, like understanding their needs, their pain points, just sort of ingratiating yourself with folks, I think helps sort of engender a lot of goodwill and leads to like good product development whenever you start actually shipping.
Well, let's flip it around now. Nandi will go with you first this time, so you can take the good stuff first. So if you have a lot of DevRels, hopefully are listening and watching this, so if they get their 5 minutes to come into the C-suite to pitch, here's how we can use community to grow our business faster, how would you coach them and how to approach that conversation?
So I'll go back to what my classic fallback, which you mentioned earlier, which is content. I'm just like the big content guy. I think it's one of the most like scalable things you can do as an organization, especially as a DevRel team. And the reason I mention it is that, again, as a context, I work with a lot of early stage companies that really just don't have that much headcount and really don't have that much time to spare for different activities. And the nice thing about content is like once you put it out there, it's out on the internet working for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it has there's a sort of like power law distribution relative to content where like maybe most of the pieces you put out don't necessarily do that well, but a couple do extremely well. And they basically live on, forever. And there could be articles that you wrote 3 years ago that are still driving a very large share of traffic to your product or service. And so I think content is like one of the most scalable, especially in a kind of low resource environment. Yeah, for sure.
Content never sleeps, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think the other cool thing you and I talked about is that you can also measure content in a lot of interesting ways. If you're trying to measure what's the impact depending on where in your business and the stage of the developer journey, there's so much you can tap into now that you can link it to ROI, as you track. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Who wants to go next? PJ, you got it.
I'll go next. I'll be in the middle. I would say that first of all, Nandi was 100% correct. Like exploding content, but I would also say, going back to kind of the metrics idea, what C-suite folks really like is clear and concise charts. Saying things like, "Hey, I know that if we invest $10,000 in this sponsorship, we're going to meet 5,000 people when we go to this event." Or, I know that if we do a podcast instead of a webinar, we have longer lasting interactions with people as opposed to a one-time thing. Bring in the numbers. C-suite folks love the numbers because they know they can turn around to the board and say, "Hey, look, this is what my DevRel professional said. This is exactly what we're doing." This is the one case where you can kind of use some vanity metrics and get away with it. So they're not going to ask you specifically. I've never worked with a C-suite person who was like, "Hey, tell me what specifically why we're doing 600 to 800 word articles instead of 800 to 1200 word articles."
Yeah.
They don't need to get into that level of minutia. The granularity is not important. They want big picture, but give them big picture numbers. Like, hey, here's our activities. Here's what we have our OKR set at. Here's what we're hoping to do, and here's the information we've received in feedback already. That's the key, and a lot of that is going to be based on the content you're producing.
Awesome. Good input. Carolyn?
Yeah, I guess if you're going to C-suite and you're wanting to set up a program, increase your budget, get more recognition for it, I think you always have to come back to, why are we investing in DevRel? Are we growing revenue? Are we reducing support costs, faster time to market, new channels? You really need to be able to articulate what that investment means to the business. And yeah, charts always work.
The more beautiful, the better, but simpler, the better. Right? So, well, I'd say two things. One, I think it's an opportunity to elevate. So going in and defending or articulating why DevRel is certainly one approach, but I think coming in and saying, hey, there's a bigger game here, and let's call it developer success, the term that Carolyn used. And developer success is a team sport. So while we as a DevRel team might be leading the charge, this is a company initiative to acquire happy customers faster. And that to simplify it to that. I think the other thing that works for me, like when somebody comes to me trying to convince me of something, and I shouldn't say this too much if my own team does it, but is fear. Like, show them what the competition is doing. And like, if we don't do this, we're going to get run over by the competition. Look at the awesome job they're doing on content, on activation, on how active they are in all these different community channels that are relevant to the business. It's like we're just being outgunned, and there's no reason for that, right? That's an awesome way to motivate a CEO, I could say.
One good thing about social media is it drives a lot of FOMO. So,
I've heard some CEOs of billion-dollar tech companies that are prowling around all these community boards looking for negative sentiment and sending snippets to their team. I just literally was chatting with somebody last week that does that. Yeah. It's not like we don't have other things to do, right? So.
I wanted to ask a question to Ramon, if that's okay.
Yeah.
As an investor, some of them are finally starting to get it, right? That developer relations is something interesting, and is a way to make some money. What do you say to other investors who don't quite get it yet?
Yeah. I think you meant to Namdi. Ramon was the host, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I figured you meant me. Well, it's not in my interest to say much to other investors. If they don't get it, that's better for me.
So, everybody's losing money. Go to Namdi right now.
Yeah. But maybe like if there are other investors who I maybe have more aligned interests with, maybe we're involved in the same company. It's funny. I think as in like investors, it's very easy, especially as companies scale and there's more metrics and numbers to look at. It's very easy to kind of reduce these things to like a mathematical exercise of we're scaling this fast, we're adding these many users, and like whatever. But almost uniformly, if you look at the dev-centric companies that have created a lot of value, they've created a zeitgeist around their company. They've moved mountains as far as like community goes. They've galvanized large groups of developers to use their product and almost created sort of grassroots, almost like consumer, like what you can see in like consumer companies type dynamics around their company. And so like one way or another, I think to reach like big outcomes and big, companies and within the developer world, you have to do this. There's no sort of just putting one foot in front of the other and making all the metrics go in the right direction that gets you there. On some level, there has to be some thing that's sort of hard to encapsulate that ends up sort of, driving you forward. And I think that
they talk about, right? The multiplier and the moat.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'd say for the less enlightened investors, that unlike Namdi, who gets it is that, I think investors are pattern matchers, right? You're professional pattern matchers. You're like little machine learning people. But Metaphors and showing what's working is probably the best example. So you just take a couple of stories that you can pepper in. Look at what Docker did. I mean, to me, it's an amazing story. Docker 3-4 years ago decided to get out of their enterprise distribution business, reboot as a bottoms-up developer-first company, and now, last I heard, $60 million, growing 40-50%. Like, it's a miracle, and they're not the only one. So I think telling those stories and showing how what you're doing is similar to those success stories is one easy way to get it across without having to dive too much in the numbers. Because ultimately, right, it's the story that catches you, not the number. The numbers will back up the story.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, that's what I like to believe. Yeah. Great question. So there's another comment from Nitin on the channel. The content aligned with the goals of your sales folks that supports great customer conversations works really well. I think it's a great insight, but I think probably helping salespeople. If you think, okay, how else can you help salespeople, right? Because you don't want them being overly salesy on the communities themselves. They have to show up and be helpful to people and nurture them. But showing them what kind of content is going to resonate. People that are at this stage of the journey or experiencing this, like, here's how you're going to get them more motivated or more educated. I think that's super useful if you can tap into this sort of great organic conversation and help them be more effective in their next sales call. They meet that person at an event. What are they going to say to that person, right?
Right. I think the key word you had there was education. Your sales folks will see where everyone's getting tripped up. And I'll include that, when I say sales, I include like the onboarding teams and your technical salespeople, anybody who's involved in the process of getting someone started with what you do. They're going to see exactly where every fail point is. They should definitely be the people that are informing you, especially on like your documentation, your getting started guides, your learning stuff. All of that needs to be coming from the sales organization because they're the ones who know. They're the ones who say, yeah, so on step 3, it says you should do this, but actually what happens is this, and you can't do that. We need to fix the documentation. That should be like an immediate, and this is why, again, the communication between sales and DevRel is so key.
Yeah, I would say sales people and then sales engineers specifically are like a wealth of information. It's actually shocking how much they know when you actually just sit down and talk to a sales engineer about what they're seeing in the accounts. And so spend a lot of time with those folks.
Yeah,
I agree. I think sales engineers are some of the gold in companies that are just often overlooked.
Right. Yeah, I think going back to more things change, they stay the same. Like in all the businesses I've had that were successful growth businesses, I will say that it was the pre-sales people that made it happen. When you're trying to sell, especially when you're trying to sell something new and you're in a highly competitive environment, the passion they show in getting out there, engaging with the customer and clarifying things, that's what makes a huge difference. And then it becomes at some point, hopefully, a perpetual motion machine. So I think this is a whole new era. I mean, pre-sales people, if I had we're still trying to get into escape velocity, but if I was running a hyper growth business, I would always be investing first in pre-sales ahead of the sales reps, because they're the ones that are going to get you closest to how the customer user really thinks. I think their role changes. They can actually be good synthesizers too of like what the heck is going on here, so that we can help the rep show up better, or we can help the marketing people write better content that's going to influence people better, or find the right people to write content for us. Right, PJ? Is that
exactly? Yeah,
it's finding the right influencers that are saying the right stuff that gets people through the hoop, right?
That's the one place we want to be careful, because I think a lot of times sales says, let's align ourselves with influencers, and you're much better aligning yourself with practitioners. Influencers can be flash in the pan. They can be come and go. You can maybe leverage them for some brief or some ephemeral content, but in the long run, an influencer isn't what's going to matter. You want that long-term community growth. You want someone who's like a practitioner. This is why, I think ambassador programs and superstar programs and things like that are so much more valuable, because you don't want someone who says, oh, wow, the Kardashian of Ruby on Rails said this. You want someone who's saying, hey, Jane down the street who uses this every day and knows what she's talking about is saying this is the way to go. I believe Jane.
Yeah. Well, I'd say in the 50 DevRel podcasts that we've done so far, only one person said they use TikTok to reach out.
And it wasn't me.
It wasn't you. No. Okay, we have a minute left, so I thought I'd give each of you, a platform to kind of share some last thoughts on how you think about, again, how do you help people align DevRel with the business stakeholders? Any final thoughts you want to share?
Can I just add a question in there that maybe we can also wrap up with? We certainly talked about the CEO level a lot. We talked about sales and marketing, but I don't think we touched on enough about the product people and how we really need to form alignment with them. And I've seen it again in larger companies, and I've seen it in startups that are so product driven. And we sort of learn as you go, and sometimes it's personalities, but be interested to hear from you folks. I mean, we can talk about customer success and we can, make sure that they understand that this is an input, but engineers have been, and software engineers have been taught to be gods these days. And it's often really hard to get them to see that they got to play nice with everybody else.
I think it's a great observation. I just frame it a little bit too. There's a new trend that people are talking about. The CPO is the new CMO, right? That in a lot of companies that head of product who actually owns all these touch point functions, from developer marketing or DevRel to pre-sales and post-sales, like they're the ones that kind of are almost like general managing the whole thing come together, but they're doing it from the perspective of an awesome product experience. So that's another way.
They often don't do it from the community experience.
Yeah, they probably don't do that enough, right? So having them get religion as that trend emerges might be an interesting dynamic. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt your final words, guys. So.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think as far as final words, I think it's a little bit to what we've just been discussing. I think the best thing to do is to just get alignment as early as possible. Into our discussion earlier, like make sure you have a seat at the table. Like the common failure mode I see is like startups scale is that the DevRel team is like one of the earliest folks there. And then as the company matures, you start hiring in VPs of X, Y, and Z. And the conversations around bringing those folks on board are totally orthogonal to what the DevRel team has been doing to date. And then they end up getting left out of the conversation. And because there's no like C-suites or sometimes no VP level DevRel person, DevRel just rolls up into one of those things. It's easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle as companies scale. And so like, don't be shy, like fight for your right, so to speak, like make sure you're represented and that you have alignment with the rest of your org, and do it from the earliest stages, because this stuff gets calcified at a certain point and it becomes harder later on to fight back. So
are you promoting to your companies to have a VP DevRel?
Not necessarily. If they wanted to do that, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it. But it's less about like there has to be one, and more just like whatever we do, let's just be super explicit about it, and like not have it be something that just kind of like bends and then DevRel gets lost, kind of in the shuffle. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
PJ.
Yeah, I think that my final thoughts are really around focusing on building your community both internally and externally. If you want to be successful, if you want to find value in the thing that DevRel is doing, I think this goes back to what Nandi's saying, is you have to build it up. You have to give it the respect that it deserves and its place in the organization along with everything else that you're doing. I think that goes with what Caroline's saying too. If you're not talking to sales and product and marketing and the C-suite and all the VPs, what are you doing as a DevRel organization? You're not cultivating that community. And that's exactly what we do. So cultivate internally, cultivate externally, plant the seeds and watch them grow.
Yeah, you're back to the farming metaphor. We got you.
Yeah, got to.
I think one of our podcast guests described that as like they see themselves as a two-sided mirror, right? They're influencing the community and hoping that they can be engaged and successful with the company. And then they flip it around and say the same thing to all the different stakeholders in their company. How do they, benefit from and know how to engage so they can scale, their connections with the community. So it really is two-sided. And it's a tough job. Hey, doing both of these things.
Absolutely. It's a tough job, but it's such an important job. And as we all know, it's very rewarding too.
Yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. So thanks to all of you for taking some time out of your day to join. So I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. And I'm sure we'll see you all soon. So thanks again.
DevRel Con Deep Dives. Yar!